Alors, le sujet suivant va nous emmener vers la biodiversité urbaine et c'est un professeur de botanique et de gestion de l'environnement à la VUB qui va nous plonger dans cet aspect de la durabilité de Bruxelles. Il a travaillé pour le Centre d'information de la forêt de Soigne avec l'IBGE. Il doit faire des contributions, il fera des contributions pour le réseau Natura 2000 à Bruxelles. Et il consacre une grande partie de son temps aujourd'hui aux recherches sur les mangroves. Je vous demande d'applaudir Nico Koedam.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, I will talk to you about biodiversity in Brussels, both the ordinary and the extraordinary about it. And biodiversity, it's very late in the evening. It's a very complex and inflated concept, though very important. And people usually think about biodiversity as that it should be maximal. We need the highest biodiversity. However, when we think about red fox, many of us are happy that the red fox is colonizing, or rather recolonizing, the Brussels territory, because it brings us into touch with wildlife, with real wildlife. But then when we notice the horse chestnut leaf miner, which has been conquering Europe at a rate of 60 kilometers per year, and now disfiguring our horse chestnut, itself a foreign tree, we're much less happy. When we look at the black rat, not very apparent on this slide at this moment, which was the vector of plague in the Middle Ages up to the 19th century, we are very happy that it's no longer part of our biodiversity and that we got rid of it. We had a saint, Saint Rochus, who protected us against the plague, but apparently he himself also disappears at moments. So we have to look for biodiversity and we have to look for the ordinary and the extraordinary in the city. But what's a city? First of all, a biologist can see a city as buildings and humans, as you see it here in London. We can add some greenery. The same site, November, this month in London. Very beautiful view of the city of London with St. Paul's and some greenery. But you can also see the city as a Fremdkörper in nature, with a very strong boundary, a very sharp boundary between the city and nature. Or you can see the city as a place where there are fluxes of energy and matter. But I'd rather see the city as a legacy of prehistory and history, also in its biodiversity. You see here Athens and Piraeus, and we often see these cities as masses of concrete and marble, but you have to know that in the very city center, it's full of extraordinary biodiversity. So I also wish to see Brussels as a legacy in its biodiversity of prehistory, history, present dates, and also to think about the future. Prehistory, that's before humans were there, before Brussels was there. History is the city when it developed in its rural environment, and the present are modern times, and we also have to think about what is ahead. About a prehistory. Brussels is a valley, actually, but you don't see it. Well, if you look at this picture, and you see to the left the stock exchange, the Beurs, and you see to the right the church of Molenbeek, we have to realize that there is a valley in between, but we don't see it, we hardly see it. We know it, but we don't see it. And the name of Brussels itself, as you may know, Bruxelles in transliteration, is in fact the city founded in the marshes, or the settlement in the marshes. These marshes are difficult to find right now, but when we go to Vorst, we still find toponymy, like the Bemtlaan, and Bemt or Beemt in Dutch is a natural wet meadow. And it's not exactly as what you see. The colors are much better in reality than what you see here, but at least it reflects the wet history of Brussels. Very nearby, very near the Midi station, you find a beautiful wetland with a very high biodiversity. Unfortunately, this wetland is neither natural nor planted. It's purely spontaneous on a building ground, on a wasteland, and it's at this moment already disappearing. When we go to the name of Elsene, Elsene refers to the tree, as you see in the coat of arms of Elsene, also to the tree Els, which is an alder. And though the ponds of Elsene are fully artificial, they are in a valley, and many of the trees around it were associated with the aquatic environment, though most of the species you see now are introduced non-native plants. But still, the odor, the Els, is prevailing in the Brussels territory. But we find also more natural biodiversity. In fact, you see a distribution map here of the great horsetail. And the great horsetail is an indicator for groundwater welling up at certain places, especially first places, and this is well distributed, and we still have this natural environment of Brussels before Brussels existed in many places in Brussels. Brussels is also known for its forested origin, and we find remnants like Engeland and Ukkel, which has nothing to do with England, by the way, this name, and we find there the Gelder rose, Viburnum opulus, exactly in the same place where the quite brilliant professor of the UAB, Jean Massard, found it in 1911, when he described Engeland with lots of rare plants and lots of rare organisms in general, which mostly disappeared now because the cemetery of Ukkel is built on top of this extraordinary valley at that moment. Brussels is very well known basically also for its forest, the Sonian forest, which is unique. And here you see a 17th century representation of the Sonian forest, highly exaggerated in its romantic view on the Brussels environment. We see it here also in a cartoon with Mary of Burgundy, but the forest has neither looked like it was shown in the 17th century, nor like this. The forest has never been, in historical times, that even aged beech forest which is represented here. But a lot of biodiversity has been conserved, and one of the most iconic species for sure is a roe deer. And you see a press release of 2013 mentioning that the roe deer is doing quite well, and it's very close to our, in fact it's present in our city. When we go to the historical period, everything that is related to the presence of humans, it's strangely enough much more difficult to find remnants of that. When you go here to the Rue de l'Hermitage in Elsene, Ixelles, it's almost unrecognizable if you go to the place right now. And it is a very recent rural past of Brussels. And we have remnants of agriculture. You can go around in Brussels, and in several places you will find remnants of agriculture, very small as you see on this Google Earth picture. But it's very difficult to find the organisms associated with this. I may be interpreted, but flax, which was one of the pillars of medieval economy, is still present in the Brussels environment. Also the field horse still, another horse still. Here we made a poster maybe 15 years ago to make people aware of the biodiversity near to their house. It's associated with human activities, with agriculture, with disturbance, and it's very much present in Brussels. But then we go to the 19th century, and these images of Schaerbeek, don't try to find them in Schaerbeek, because this village was entirely destroyed and entirely replaced, and nothing of it remains. And when you go to the Parc Josaphat, which is a very beautiful park, nothing there is natural. Neither the brook, nor the rocks, nor the plantations. Everything is artificial, very typical for the 19th century. So we come to modern times. And the modern times brought us this beautiful series of cemeteries, for instance, like the Dieweg, which is almost like a jungle now. But this jungle is partially native, but mostly planted. But it also contributes to our biodiversity. Not only jungle, not only biodiversity, but also very interesting monuments, by the way, in this Dieweg cemetery. Allotment gardens, volkstuintjes. They're full of ancient crops, of recent crops, but also full of root-row plants, disturbance plants. Lots of animals there also, so it contributes to biodiversity. Maybe 50 or 60% of European territory would be gardens, private parks, public parks, cemeteries, etc. This is enormous. This is quite high, much more than many people think. But this 19th century and 20th century also enriched us with undesired species. This panel danger probably does not point at the South African plants which are below, but effectively many of the plants there would be considered undesired by many people managing nature and doing conservation. We made this poster again, maybe 15 years ago again, drawing attention to the butterfly bush, which is a South African plant and which is all over Brussels, but it's not native. Yet it contributes to biodiversity and may sustain also insect populations. Knotweed, same story. It makes full jungles here near Wiels, really impenetrable jungles, but it's a foreign species and many people consider it undesired. It also applies to animals. I could make a long story about the pigeons there. They're undesired and they're foreign, but also this beautiful goose. It is foreign and many people want to get rid of it because it's not part of our biodiversity. Yet it is biodiversity in Brussels as well. But what is ahead? How grim is the future? Well, I'm not going to talk much about science, but first of all we have extinction depth. Extinction depth means that we can expect a lot of extinction because of actions and processes of the past. I want to be optimistic, but we have done many things in the past, and we have to expect many extinctions still. We all know about climate change, populations and ecosystems have reduced in area. We have fragmented them. There's a lot of pollution. There's impoverishment of ecosystems and populations. There's enrichment, often with undesired species. And this means that there also may be a loss of function of ecosystems. Pollution is everywhere. We know it. The most beautiful days in Brussels are full of polluted air. And we think about climate change. This beautiful album of François Schout and Benoît Peters is not about climate change, but climate change is something to count with also in the future in Brussels. And the only signs I want to show you is this. This is 4 different articles. Lower left, you see a map of Brussels in its Brussels urban heat island. And the blacker, the more the difference of the Brussels temperature with the surrounding environment. And at certain moments, this may be a difference of 4 degrees. Lower right, you will see that the urban heat island effect selects foreign species associated with warmer temperature tolerance and also with drought. And then you see above that there's still a large extinction depth ongoing for the indigenous species. The lower map, the higher map, sorry, gives you the parakeet, which is a foreign species which you hear everywhere shouting and making a lot of noise in Brussels and many towns. And this breeding, this parakeet is breeding quite effectively in many Belgian cities and also is a competitor to native birds. These authors, by the way, said that at the moment is not a threat, but it indicates a threat that may still come. These are the original papers, and I will not comment scientifically more on them at this moment. But there are also tales of the extraordinary. A collaborator of mine in this huge, who went around in this huge building site of Delta, which you must all know, which is now far built over, much more than you see here, discovered an orchid which was never seen in Brussels. A huge orchid, really at the side of the Triomphlaan. And this orchid is not only rare for Brussels, it's rare for Belgium altogether and for Europe altogether. And it suddenly popped up in Delta. Unfortunately, it's built over now. The population doesn't exist anymore. My own university, this is the rectorate, it's a protected building, by the way, of Renate Braam. Suddenly we discovered a bee orchid population just behind the rectorate. Unfortunately, the bad news is that our personal barbecue was organized on top of the population. However, it probably will survive and it will pop up again. We are aware of it and we try to conserve it now. When we go to this beautiful protected area, Floria Logis in Watermaal-Bosvoorde, it's full of very rare mushrooms, just in front of the houses, just by the management which took place spontaneously. In the same site, it's one of the few populations of the stag beetle. Here, beautiful presentation of Albrecht Dürer of 1505, but it's a European protected species. So is it all worth it? Yes, it is all worth it. I will not comment all these maps, but these are grids of 1 square kilometer, and it shows the number of species in every square kilometer of mammals, breeding birds, etc. And this is very high, especially in the southeast of Belgium. So we have a very rich biodiversity in Brussels. And who's managing all this? Well, there are many managers, but certainly we have to mention the Brussels Institute of Environmental Management, which does sometimes extraordinary things also. This valley, the Geleidsbeek, was restored to, I wouldn't say its original shape, but at least it refers to the aquatic original Brussels area. And this river, you see it, how it was during the works and how it is now. And this is work of the IBGE BM, and they do great jobs in this. But the last slide I want to show you is that something we shouldn't forget. We're in the capital of Europe. And Europe hosts the European Commission. And the European Commission is responsible for Natura 2000 network. We don't realize always. The Natura 2000 network covers 1/5 of European territory on land. 1/5, that's quite a lot. And the Natura 2000 network has been estimated to be worth, in economic value, 200 to 300 billion euro per year. In Europe, only on land, not even counting the seas. So be proud, Europeans, because this is the strongest and most important conservation network worldwide. And then I would add, be proud, Brussels citizens, because the Brussels capital region, capital of Europe, hosting European Commission, has 14% of its territory under the Natura 2000 network, under conservation of Europe. I cannot give an estimate right now how much it's worth, but it's not certainly about 1 beetle and 1 orchid. This is worth quite a lot. Thank you.